Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Startup Seminar, which is part of our Startup Camp, the big event this week as part of our series of entrepreneurial events helping students at the City University of London find out more about how to start their own business and learn from those who've done it before them. I'm honoured and have the pleasure of welcoming our guests, but before we do that, what I would like to do is take you through a couple of slides which will describe to you more about what we've got in store for you this evening. So, as you already know, hopefully you attended last night's seminar with Kanya King. These are all part of our events for the Startup Camp, which is a week-long series of events helping you meet entrepreneurs and see those that have done it before, including our own students who have been hosting panels and answering your questions on how to start a business whilst at university. This is our first in the series of startup seminars, and there are 8 of these across the first term. And tonight we'll be starting with an interview with founder of Caffè Nero and Talent Bank, but more on that in a second. And the idea being, for students and alumni at City, what we want you to do is take this journey with us, hopefully starting with a startup camp, and you would have been at the event last night, coming to all of our startup seminars, and then maybe applying for the City Spark finals, where you can win money for your entrepreneurial ideas. We also have the opportunity for you to meet our team and gain one-to-one advice too. So without putting it in a more abstract concept, here you go. This is it in a more linear way of thinking about it. So the startup camp first, then seminars, and then hopefully you'll apply for one of our competitions for funding. And it's all very easy to find. Please visit the website city.ac.uk/entrepreneurship and hit the start button. And then in there, you'll find all of these marvelous events, which are designed to help you start your own business or get a flavour for what it's like. These skills are not just for entrepreneurs, they're for intrapreneurs, which is what a lot of employers are looking for these days. Okay, so on to our event this evening. Hello both, I can see you're both here. Fantastic. I'm going to do a little intro if that's okay by you. So, first up, we have our interviewer this evening. It's Lauren Lefranc, who is a big friend of us, of the service, of City Ventures. Lauren is the founder of the Little Coffee Company and an award-winning sustainable enterprise that helps smallholder farmers get access to markets and funding. Lauren works mainly with female farmers in disadvantaged communities to help them build economic independence and sustainable farming methods. Her work takes place across the Caribbean and Africa. She recently won awards such as the Inspiring Innovator of the Year Award, which is something that City does in partnership with Arbuthnot Latham. And also you do a lot of public speaking on behalf of us. So thank you again, Lauren, for helping us out. But Lauren's other talents lie in her legal speciality, in that she is a qualified lawyer and has been called to the bar for England and Wales. Thank you for joining us this evening, Lauren. And our other guest is, of course, Pablo Ettinger, one of the co-founders of Caffè Nero. I don't want to ruin your story too much because we're going to get into that this evening, so I'll just leave it at Pablo likes coffee and music. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen, and now I'm going to hand over to Lauren to take the interview away. Thank you very much.
Great. First of all, it's good to see you, Pablo. I haven't seen you in a while. Right, so I think the first thing I want to start with is just kind of about you, and tell us about yourself, like where you grew up, like what your family life was like. I think that's a great place to start.
Okay, well, we'll start at the beginning. I was born in London, second generation immigrant. My parents came over to this country in the 1930s. And I spent the first 16 years of my life just outside of London, living on the edge of the country, between Uxbridge and Northwood. Very well. Actually, it wasn't a typical upbringing. I mean, we were a kind of a continental family living living in the UK. So I was kind of half continental, half British. And I had an interesting mix of cultures there. And in fact, then when I was 16, my parents decided that I should get to know something of my background. And they sent me off to boarding school in Vienna for a year, just under a year, which was quite a challenge because I didn't actually speak any German when I arrived, but I spoke pretty fluent German by the time I left, as you can imagine, being in a tough boarding school. So I then started to kind of get a feel for travel and for, you know, I really started to understand more about multiculturalism and my background. And I then was, from then on, I spent a lot of time in France. We typically spent, as a family, we spent about 2 months a year in France, and then traveled for a year between school and university. One of my main activities in sports is skiing, so I was a ski instructor for a year, or for a winter. Then I went to Southampton University in this country. After university, I had no idea what to do, so I traveled quite a bit. I did another season in the Alps, traveled around the world a bit, ended up living, believe it or not, living in the Libyan desert, in the Sahara Desert for 2 years, and had a fabulous job, the most interesting job of my life. I was an explosives expert, actually. I managed to do 2 years in Africa and then came back to the UK. So I had sort of quite a mixed upbringing in many ways.
I hope your boarding school had better food than mine.
The boarding school actually had very, very good school, very good food. My school in the UK, I went to a grammar school, and I can't say the food was too good. So my love of food definitely didn't come out of grammar school in the UK.
So you kind of mentioned that you traveled and had all these different experiences. Do you think that kind of multiculturalism has kind of influenced your business mentality?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we look at Caffè Nero, was really about bringing continental culture to this country. So in that sense, it had a huge influence on me. I think the other thing it did is it made me, I think, quite good at communicating with people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all cultures. You know, it was an interesting point in my life when I was probably 16, 17, and we had a brilliant teacher in school in the UK, and it was sixth form studies, and he asked a question of the whole class: who among you think that you have your class you've gone up in a class from your parents? And a few people put up their hand, and then he said, who think they might have gone down in class? You know, what a question. And a few people put their hand up, and then he said, how many of you think you've just remained the same as your parents' class? And a lot of people put their hand up. And I couldn't put my hand up. I didn't belong in that class thing, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't get it at all. And it was at that point that I realized, you know, I was just a bit different. I was an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
In some respects. So yeah, from then on, I think I was far more aware of culture and how much it affects the way people behave.
Yeah, I completely understand, actually. And so at what point were you thinking in your mind, I'm going to set up Caffè Nero, or you started even to have an interest in coffee? Like, when did that start?
It really, so after I lived in the Libyan desert, I realized I had to get my career back on track because being an explosives expert has its limitations. And I ended up getting a place at INSEAD to do an MBA in Fontainebleau. So I lived in France for a year, and I already knew France really well. And I actually lived with 4 other MBA students in an old restaurant. And we were all very, very keen chefs at that time, or we were all very keen about food. And we were very competitive. We all took turns at cooking and going to the market and buying the food. And that's why that's where I really got interested on the food side. I mean, that had a huge impact on me.
Yeah. And what were some of your like favorite dishes that you like to cook then? I'd like to think I cook, but I don't know, maybe people will say otherwise.
Typically, I love French cuisine. I use a lot of butter and cream, or I did until quite recently. I've cut back. Really great. I'm not going to put out any recipes now, but good. I would say good classic French cuisine.
Okay, so then your love for cooking and your love for food, that kind of inspired you to then set up Caffè Nero?
No, not at all.
No? There are a lot more stages.
Well, it was my hobby, and I love cooking, and I still cook every night. But I never thought it would become my career. And after INSEAD, after my MBA, I was headhunted into a big chemical company, and actually spent the next 13 years, far too long, working in chemicals. And the last 5 years of that, I actually worked in M&A, building businesses in China and Asia, all around Asia, which was very entrepreneurial and very interesting, but within a big company. The beauty of that is that I made lots of mistakes with other people's money, which is a great thing to do. And finally, I acquired a business in Germany, a beautiful chemical company, typical Mittelstand family business. And as there were only 2 people in head office who spoke German, the other one being the chairman, I got sent to Germany to help run this business. So by then we had 3 young kids, and we went to Germany. I lived in Germany for 2 years, running a chemical business. And then the kids were coming up to school age. We wanted to come back to the UK. And I was fed up of working for a big company, because what happened is Courtaulds was very, very badly managed, unfortunately. And in the end, we were taken over by a Dutch company, Akzo Nobel, and we went from being, I think, 40,000 employees to 90,000 employees, at which point
Okay, Paul's frozen on my side.
Yes, I think. Hello, everybody. We've just got an issue with Pablo's Wi-Fi at the moment. Yeah, I could finish the story for him, but I think it's probably best that we wait for him to.
I think so. It's so interesting to kind of find out about.
There we go.
Oh, you're back. Okay, you froze for a bit. So you were just telling me about how you were involved in this company. You were involved in this company, and then you were trying to tell me about how Caffè Nero developed and how that idea came about. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty there, but if you just take us back to that. Paul, I think you're muted.
I think.
Right, I am muted, but I've turned off my video because I have to move to a better point in the house. Forgive me for 1 minute.
I think Pablo was located in the office there. Well, maybe the basement.
Okay, Pablo. Okay, you're back.
I'm moving down.
See, this is great. We get to see different scenes in Pablo's life now. We're moving with the pictures.
Right.
I did forget to add, actually, earlier to all of the people who tuned in, that if you would like to ask either of our panelists a question, then please use the Q&A function, and we'll pick that up at the end. Right, I'll disappear and I'll let you carry on.
Pablo, you're back. You were telling us about your story and just saying you're getting to the point of how Caffè Nero came about.
So we were working. I was working and living in Germany, And a friend of mine, actually a friend from INSEAD, who I did my MBA with, just rang me up out of the blue, really, and said, you know, I hear you're coming back. We'll want to come back to London. You know, we've been talking about starting a coffee bar. We had actually been talking about it for a while. You know about food. Come and do the food. And that was it. Now, I couldn't really accept because he couldn't afford to pay me. Obviously, it was a startup. But I agreed to do 12 weeks. And what happened is I then managed to find a job running a chemical company in the UK. But the owner of this chemical company agreed to let me take 3 months off to do Caffè Nero. And then I would start with the chemical company. So I came back to the UK, did a number of weeks with Caffè Nero, did I think 12 weeks, and then was supposed to go and run a chemical company again. And actually what happened is that I kept putting it off and putting it off. And in the end, he said, you have to start because I had a contract. And I did one day in the chemical company, and a typical first day as a new CEO, was shown around, given a tour, shown all the numbers. And at the end of the day, I sat in the owner's office and I said to him, your order books are empty. We have a real problem. You're going to run out of cash. You have to make a third of your workforce redundant, I would say. And the owner of this company, after he thought about it for a moment, agreed with me that he had to make the people redundant. And then I told him that I had to be one of them because he couldn't afford to pay me. Mm-hmm. So I made myself redundant after the first day. I went home to my wife, who asked me if I'd had a good day at the office. And I explained to her that I'd made a third of the workforce redundant, and then told her that I was one of them. Of course, she wasn't happy about that at all because she knew how much I was enjoying the food and starting up these coffee bars. But she also knew that it was a passion of mine, and that's what I really wanted to do. So I kind of fell into Caffè Nero quite by accident in a way. I never intended to do it full time, but I just found myself enjoying it so much, and it was just such a wonderful breath of fresh air, going from a company of 90,000 people mm-hmm. to a company of 35 employees. I never thought about leaving.
It's funny how those things happen when you look back at it. Like, you fall into different businesses, and then you never, like, for example, for me, I never intended to set up a business. So it's just interesting looking back when you just really follow your passion and follow what you love. So you mentioned that at the time when you were at Caffè Nero, you started with there were 35 employees. Yep. And now obviously Caffè Nero's a well-known brand with so many locations. How did you manage to grow such an amazing brand over the years? What are some of the things that you did, or some of your successes? Any tips? Like, how were you able to do this in such a competitive market as well?
Well, you're younger than I am. You won't remember. You will not remember. But back in 98, when we really got going, I mean, there was no market. There was no coffee bar market. It just didn't exist. People had no idea, had no concept of what a coffee bar was. There were tea shops and there were pubs, and then there were a few in London. There were quite a few Italian sandwich shops. But if you asked for a coffee, they would take a polystyrene cup, put Nescafe in, and fill it with hot water. So, there was no market really when we started, other than, probably in the whole of London, there might have been 15 coffee bars. Yeah. We were lucky in that we arrived in a market which was ripe. It was just a perfect timing mm-hmm. to start coffee. Of course, it could have worked the other way. I mean, we didn't know if it was going to develop or not. But luckily, what happened, I think, is that the population of this country had started traveling, you know, in mass travel started in the 1960s, 1970s. So people were getting used to continental life, if you like. And so a lot of people went to Spain or France for holiday and knew what a real coffee bar was. So once we brought that initially into London, people, you know, very quickly found it was something that they enjoyed as much in London as they did maybe on holiday. And in a way, the concept, you know, we've never really sold coffee. We have sold an environment in which people feel really good. And to some extent, it's like people go on holiday for 15 or 20 minutes when they come to Caffè Nero, and they're suddenly in a different world. And so we deliberately set out to create that environment by the design, by the music, by, you know, by the service that they got as they walked in. You know, this market that didn't exist started to grow. And then we had a bit of luck, which we didn't realize at the time, but about maybe 9 months after starting Caffè Nero, we woke up one morning to read the headlines that Starbucks had bought one of our competitors. They bought Seattle Coffee Company. So suddenly we had a huge monster competitor on our doorstep, and they had something like 50 coffee bars, which obviously was very, very frightening at the time. And we, you know, we weren't sure that we would survive. But actually what happened is that Starbucks had the money to really develop the market, and they started to spend a lot of money on marketing, which we could never do because we didn't have a bean. So they helped to develop the market, and then we came along on their tail and said thank you very much, and by the way, we think our coffee's better.
Right. And that's interesting because I suppose, you know, now the market is so saturated, but Caffè Nero still stands. So, you know, that's a testament to what you've developed and that kind of environment that you've created, because it's not just about selling coffee.
No.
It's about that kind of lifestyle that you'd mentioned. So what would you think is you kind of touched on it before, but like really special about Caffè Nero? Is there anything else that you want to add to that?
Well, one of the key elements of it is about the service that you receive, and you know, very interesting. If you look at the difference between, say, us and Starbucks, Starbucks was always a transaction. You know, you go into Starbucks, you start at one end of the counter, you know, someone will take your order, then you get moved down, someone else will make your order, and then take your money, and then you get moved down and someone else will give you your coffee, which has got your name on it. I mean, to us, it was very, very impersonal transaction. And what we said to our barista, to the whole team, was we want you to create a community. We want to be part of the community, and we want you to get to know your customers. So we actually sort of trained them in a way to learn the names of the customers, to talk to them, and have a one-to-one relationship. So when you come into a Caffè Nero, you've got one barista dealing with you all the time, and they take your order, they make your coffee, they take your money, hopefully they have a moment to chat to you, and they get to know you. So the idea was that, you know, within a week, if you were a regular customer, they would know your name. And as you walked in, they would say, "Morning, John," or whatever, the usual, and they'd be making your coffee.
Yeah.
So that people, you know, really feel that it's part of their community, which is a very, very different experience to the kind of transactional thing that happens in Starbucks. So yeah, we set out to be very different, and I think we have. Yeah, I think it worked. And one of the things I did, you know, up to the first 11 years, I did all the food and all the buying and all the distribution. And on top of that, I also looked after the music, because that was my other hobby, my passion.
I was going to move on to that next as well, because I know you love music.
So, you know, I created a playlist that people really enjoyed, and the playlist works, it moves through the day. So when you come in the morning, you have this quite chilled classical music, and then about 11:30, it becomes jazz, and the whole atmosphere of the coffee bar changes. You know, you can really feel it change. And then in the afternoon, around 1:30, it changes to a more laid back, acoustic, light pop, country, a different vibe. And that also had a very big impact on the atmosphere. So yeah, I mean, all of that pulled together created something that was quite different, we think, to our competitors.
Yeah.
And yeah, we did over time, we had a lot of competitors, yeah.
I do have one other question to ask about competitors though. Like, have you ever had any run-ins with any competitors? Because I know, like, particularly with me working in the coffee industry, it can be so aggressive. And I just want to know if you've had any kind of stories or run-ins or anything that was.
We did. I mean, in general, you know, most people who work in general in the hospitality industry, people are delightful,
Yeah.
and really lovely. And 99% of the people in the coffee industry are fantastic people, and I enjoy working with them. Even if they're competitors, we get on. But in the early days, we did, you know, there were 4 competitors. So there was Starbucks, Coffee Republic, Caffè Nero, and Costa. And classic market evolution theory tells you that that's one too many. And we were the smaller, you know, we were the weakest of the 4 at one time. You know, lo and behold, in fact, Costa Coffee and Starbucks became quite aggressive at one time. And we were just in the process of moving our food production to a new supplier who also supplied those 2. And literally 2 days before we were due to change, they turned around to this supplier and said, if you supply Caffè Nero, you will never deal with us again.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's really aggressive and probably quite illegal, I don't know. But anyway, I mean, the poor supplier had to ring me up, and he was in tears. He was a delightful guy, who became a friend. And he said, I'm really sorry, but, you know, they were much bigger than us, of course. I can't, you know, I can't annoy them, and I'm not going to be able to supply you. So very quickly, we had to find another supplier, literally. But you know, we got over that, and in fact, we then ended up buying 11% of Coffee Republic's shares because they were publicly traded. Well,
there you go.
And you know, in the end, I mean, it's a long story, and I'm not going to tell it now. But in the end, we did a deal with Coffee Republic where we gave them back their equity in return for their best stores. So that was the end of them, really. And they never survived after that. They went down very quickly. So we took them out. Yeah, I mean, that was pretty unpleasant at one time or another. Yeah, but we survived.
Yeah. So you mentioned about music, and I know you've spoken about your love for music before. So tell me about, because you've entered the music industry now. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, as I said, right from the first day of Caffè Nero, I was a guy who was always programming the music in store. And I was started to get introduced to musicians. And one guy in particular, who Tony Moore, who ran a live music venue in London. And I used to go down there every week and meet the musicians. And then 1 or 2 of them would give me their CDs, because in those days there was no streaming, they had CDs, and I would take their CDs and play them in Caffè Nero. And we developed a reputation for playing the music of unsigned artists. And then one of them asked me if he could play live and do a tour of Caffè Neros. And I said, yeah, if you really want to tour Caffè Nero, go ahead. I think by that time we probably had, 50 Caffè Neros. So he did a tour of about 20 Caffè Neros, loved it. And from then on, a lot of other musicians came along and said they wanted to do it as well. His name was Jack Savaretti, and he's done very well. So he became a friend. And on the back of that, we developed a whole live music program. And then we started to sponsor music festivals like the Cornbury Music Festival. And then 2.5 years ago, I met a couple of other guys who were equally crazy about music. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to take what we've done in Caffè Nero, but be able to develop it further and give those musicians not just the opportunity to play in Caffè Nero, but to play in great venues all around London and indeed the UK. And we set up a live music agency called Talent Bank, which has now been running for a couple of years and has been very successful until COVID came along.
Yeah. Pablo, I sent you some music. I remember I sent you some artists via email. I hope you had an opportunity to listen to them. As soon as you told me you like music, I remember I sent you some like Jamaican reggae artists. I hope you had a listen.
You know, when you say Jamaican reggae, now I remember it completely. I mean, you put me on the spot. We don't really play reggae.
I know I think you told me that.
I did.
Keep sending you music.
So I get beautiful and wonderful music sent to me, and very often I have to say to the artist, I love this music, but it doesn't really fit into our genre.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, our customers are, because there's so many of them are regulars, if I suddenly change the musical genre, you wouldn't believe how many complaints I get.
Because they're used to that routine and used to that
Exactly.
music. But one day, I still have hope that one day we'll get one reggae track.
Hereafter.
Yeah. So we next kind of question. What are you most proud of with your entrepreneurial journey so far?
I think the big one, probably the biggest one, is sort of what we created with Caffè Nero, and the impact we had. Actually, the impact we've had on the culture of this country, because the coffee culture didn't exist, as I said, before we started. And now, it's just part of our lives. And whether you work in a Nero, you meet people, you just chill out, whatever, we have had quite a big impact on the way people actually live in this country and the culture of the country, and clearly that's quite a rare thing to have achieved. But partly because of my background, the Austrian side of me, to have brought that over to the UK, is amazing. And my parents, when we started up, they said it'll never work. The English are not ready for coffee, and luckily they lived long enough to actually see it develop and be successful, and I think that was a very, very proud point. So that was one of the things. But I work in different businesses. I also have a family business which has become an iconic British business, which my father started, and we got we were given the Royal Warrant about 20 years ago, which was a great moment. But particularly as he was an immigrant and suddenly his business was given a Royal Warrant. You can imagine how he felt about that.
Yeah.
That was a good point. And I think, now what we've done for unsigned musicians, I mean, being a musician in this country, in any country, is a very, very tough job. And at the moment, it's more than tough. I mean, there is no work around at all pretty well. And I think what we've done is we've paid, as Talent Bank, we've now paid well over £300,000 to independent musicians for performances. We've made a big difference to a lot of young musicians in this country, which we're immensely proud of. Yeah. So I think those are probably the big ones.
Yeah. And any sort of lessons that you've learned?
God, there are too many to talk about.
Any failures, lessons?
Lots and lots of failures. Yeah, I mean, I'm very bad at learning from books. I'm much better at learning from my failures. But the big lessons, I think, from my early career in big business, I think you should never assume that big businesses are particularly efficient or indeed clever, because I have found that very often smaller businesses are much cleverer than big businesses. I think that's a lesson, because very often one as an entrepreneur, you can get very worried about big businesses encroaching on your territory. But I've found time and time again that very often, as a agile, flexible young business, you can beat them up every time, right? So I think that's one lesson. I think the other thing I have, I found throughout my life is that you have to build your network. Whatever you do, friends, family, and then this broad, wide network of people you meet as you go through life and your work. You have to build that up, because there'll always be times when you think, oh, I could talk to him or her, they know about that. And that's been invaluable to me, throughout all my various careers and businesses. And the big thing, and no doubt, the lesson I've learned time and time again is that, success, it's all about people, and where I've made investments or been involved in businesses, if the right people were running them, even in a very difficult market with a product that was far from perfect, you can do really well. But if you haven't got the right people running the business, that's the end of it. However good your product is, however amazing the market is, if the people aren't right, it's just not going to work. And time and time again, I have learned that to my cost at times. Mm-hmm. It all comes down to the people.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. I also wanted to know if you had any kind of key pieces of advice that you want to give any, aspiring entrepreneurs, anyone who's kind of set up a business, any final words?
Two things. Never give up, because every business I've ever been involved in, from Caffè Nero to tiny entrepreneurial businesses, there's always been a point where you think, this is not going to work, we're running out of time, we run out of money, whatever. You should never give up. There's always an extra, something you can do. And you change the way you do something, you pivot. But as an entrepreneur, you just have to be so thick-skinned. You just got to keep going. That's number one. And number two, don't run out of money.
Yeah. So on that note, those were all I think we've got some questions.
I hope.
Alex?
We do, yes. So what I'll do is I'll field some of these, and they apply to both, really. So hopefully you can help. So our first question is from an anonymous person. How do you know if an idea is a good idea? Is it mostly about your passion?
I am directed at anyone. I mean.
Yes, sorry, I'll throw it out there to Lauren.
Go.
For me personally, I 100% follow my passion. I think if you are doing what you love and you're happy with what you're doing, that's what you should be pursuing. And I think in terms of whether it's a good idea or not, just follow your passion, follow what you love. Kind of what Paul was saying earlier, he had a love for food, and then that kind of led him down a path to set up Caffè Nero. So that would kind of be my advice. Always follow your passion.
Pablo, any further advice there?
Yeah, I agree completely with Lauren. And I mean, on top of that, I would say that start whatever. If you have an idea and you think it's a good idea, but you're not sure, look at it doing it on a small scale. I mean, bootstrap. Just find a way of trying it out. I'm doing that with a young entrepreneur at the moment. He had an idea for a new food business, which is sort of an Anglo Hong Kong food. And he found a little market stall he could set up for a few £100. A few friends got together. He started it, and within a few months he learned so much from just trying it and starting it, even on a very, very small scale. He adapted the menu. He changed some of the prices. And lo and behold, he's now got a product which has been refined to the point that we can now go out and launch it properly. That would be my advice.
Yeah. Another thing I'll add to that is something else that Pablo said about network. So, if you reach out to people who've kind of done this before, you can get a lot of advice, and you'd be surprised. You can reach out to people on LinkedIn, social media, and just speak to them and see what they've done and kind of learn from their mistakes as well.
Absolutely. That's really good advice. I think following on from that, we'll take a question from Rita, which is, and you've already alluded to this, Pablo, how do you go about validating a product? So we'll go to Lauren first.
Okay, so I think it's your first sale. So I think for me, and I've told this story so many times, but I was like sitting in my room in Jamaica and I got an order from Hong Kong, and this was on, I think it was like Alibaba or something at the time, and it went through, and that for me was validation that someone would pay for my coffee. So for me, that's validation. And then when you get more and more customers, when you get like a kind of community growing and a following, that also validates your business and your product.
Absolutely. And let me tell you how I validated Caffè Nero. So when we started Caffè Nero, everyone was telling me we were completely mad, bonkers. It was never going to work. It was a fad. It would be over within a year, and that, I was crazy. I had a good degree. I had a good job. Why had I given it all up, et cetera, et cetera. You'll hear that many times. And we opened the first new Caffè Nero, and I stood outside giving out, the first day I stood outside and people just walked past. Very, very few people came in because they didn't know what a coffee bar was. They certainly didn't know what Caffè Nero was. So they just walked straight past. So we thought, right, how do we get people in? The answer is you give them a free coffee. So we had some free coffee cards printed. And I stood outside and said, anyone like a coffee? And, no one stopped. And then I realized that I had to use the word free. As soon as I said, would anyone like a free coffee? Suddenly people would stop, take the card from me and go in and get their free coffee. Fine. I mean, that's easy. Anyone can give away product. But then I stood outside the same shop watching people the next day, and the same people who had taken my free coffee were going back in and paying for their coffee. And I watched them for a few days, and quite a few of them were going in every day. And that was a validation for me. And then I could turn around to people with a certain degree of confidence and say, no, I think we're on a winner here. That was validation.
Yeah, I think when you've got customers that are not like your mum and friends and family, then you kind of got something going.
Exactly. They're spending money.
Fantastic. We've got another question which follows quite nicely here. This is from Tiban or Thiban. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Your story is amazing. So thank you very much. I recently started a new firm and the response from the public has been amazing. At the same time, I'm a university student. I would love advice on how you would prioritize your time. Now, I can't think of anyone better than you both, qualified lawyer who's doing a bit of, legal work, and Pablo, who's also got multiple roles. So let's start with Pablo.
Well, first off, you finish your degree.
I
didn't. You finish your education because, you can only do that once really. And you want to get that done and have it on your CV in the background. And then you can find ways of applying yourself to your business. And it's tough, I mean, it's great to hear that you've had success, but it's very, very hard starting any business. But it sounds like you started really well. Just keep going.
Yeah. I was running my business while I was at university and while I was doing the bar, so it was really, really hard. I wouldn't recommend doing that. I would recommend finishing your studies first. But if you're in a position where you're at university, you've started your business and you've got some success, some of the things I did was like I relied on friends and family. I had a massive whiteboard where I literally, every single hour of every single day, I would allocate all tasks and not sleep. That's how I survived. But again, I wouldn't recommend doing that. It was very hard.
I think, yes, if you are able to do it, make sure you look after yourself and try and use some tools where you can to help take it out of your head and put it onto paper or digital tool or whatever you use.
There's also some apps as well that you can use to kind of like allocate tasks and prioritize your.
Yeah, and try and find staff where you can. I think relinquishing control is one of the hardest parts of being an entrepreneur because it's yours. But when you get the opportunity, if you are making revenue, then there are gains to be had by spending it on staff. But don't run out of money. That's, the other key point. And hire good people, which I think we can take a few questions on that now because we've got a few relating to that. So this is from Fatine. Thank you for your question, Fatine. How do you identify the good people to help run your business? And let's go to Lauren for that first.
I have really struggled with this because I felt like the quote unquote good people I could never afford. So I was really relying on a lot of interns. Luckily, through City University, through programs with other universities as well, I was able to get interns, which was really helpful. It's a tough one. I know the government's got like a Kickstarter scheme as well, so you can look into that. But I guess in terms of good people, make sure you look at someone's CV, make sure that you interview them, make sure that they align with your business, possibly invite them in to like do maybe a few days and kind of try it out before you kind of offer them like a full contract. I think those would be my tips. But it is something that I struggle with at the moment.
It is the hardest thing to get right, particularly as a small young business, because very often you can't afford to pay a lot of money, and a lot of people don't want to come and work for you. It really is very, very difficult. I would add to that list of things, also take up references on people. Talk to people they've worked for previously. The one thing we did learn at Caffè Nero is that very often we were not successful in taking people from competitors or from adjacent industries. So at one time, when no one wanted to come and work for us, we were recruiting people from pubs. And that didn't work at all because we realized pretty quickly that actually one of the most important things to get right is the culture. And when you interview and recruit people, do look at the culture that you feel that they have and the culture they come from. And if they come from a very different working culture, and pubs was completely different to coffee bars, it's very difficult for people to change. So, put that right up at the top of your sort of things to look at and to think about when you're talking to them, because it makes a big difference. They have to fit in.
Yeah, and I think the old adage, is it fire fast, hire slow, or the other way around?
Yeah.
Be careful, especially in the early days, especially if it's for sweat equity.
Oh God.
Let's not go there.
Don't give equity away.
So we've had a few questions about this, Pablo, and this is about Coffee Republic. One question here from Josh Murphy. Could you explain further why having 11% of Coffee Republic's equity was so damaging to them?
It wouldn't have mattered, maybe, if they'd have been doing really well. I don't think it would have been too much of a problem for them to have us sitting there. But they weren't doing well, and they had a lot of unhappy shareholders. And actually what happened is, in the end, we actually were interested in trying to acquire them, and it would have made a lot of sense for them, and it would have made a lot of sense for us. And we did make an approach, but what happened is that their directors, the MD in particular, he didn't mention that to anyone, and they got into a lot of trouble for that, a lot of trouble, and that was really the beginning of their downfall. So if they had managed it properly, I think it could have worked really well, but they didn't. And so it did lead to their downfall.
Okay, so watch out for the shareholders and what they are and aren't telling you if you're on the other side.
Yeah.
Just another quick question about Caffè Nero from Connor. Thanks for the question, Connor. Great insight, Pablo. Thank you so much. How do you maintain the quality of food and coffee with now around 550 outlets? Yeah, good question.
Very, very good question. And having struggled with it for 11 years, the first thing I did when we started Caffè Nero, we actually bought 5 existing coffee bars, and each of them had their own little kitchen. And I realized pretty quickly that that model was not really scalable at the time, particularly not because we wanted to grow very, very fast. We knew we wanted to grow fast. So having a kitchen in every coffee bar wasn't going to work. And quality control was extremely difficult. So I within a year, I had centralized all of the production into one of our units where we had space to do it. And that helped us greatly maintain production. And then as we grew, I think once we got to about 35, that became, actually earlier than that, probably 20, that became quite unwieldy. And it was taking up all my time running a production facility rather than running a retail business. And we definitely we saw ourselves as retailers rather than manufacturing. And so I then outsourced all of the manufacturing of the sandwiches and fresh product to an outside party where I could manage them at arm's length, and it worked really well. And they were very professional, and that's all they did was make sandwiches and salads. And that's really how we did it. And that worked fine. To finish off the story is that, we now have, well over, Caffè Nero's alone in this country, 650 at the moment. And that actually became very difficult, not so much because of the food production, but the distribution became very, very, very difficult. And in fact, our manufacturer and distributor, unfortunately, did actually go out of business a few months ago, which shows how difficult it is to do that. And we're about to move to a new manufacturer and distributor. So by having everything centralized, that allowed us to control our quality. But there is a downside as well.
Yeah, and I suppose, Lauren, for you, you've got your coffee with different roasters. It's in a number of stores as well, isn't it? How do you regulate the quality that a customer will have at the end?
Yeah, so I'm operating at a much smaller scale. So for me, that's one of my fears actually, as I get bigger, like having to source from bigger farms and stuff. I'm really worried about like growing at the same time and maintaining that consistent quality. But some of the things we do is like we cup the coffee locally, we make sure that it's of a certain standard. We also offer advice to farmers in terms of their processing and the way that they grow, and we've got really good relationships with those farms. So as we grow, we'll have to hire more people to help maintain that quality on the ground as well as when the coffee arrives. So it is something that I've been thinking about, but that's how we maintain our quality at the moment.
It really is one of the huge challenges of scaling up.
It is.
And not to be underestimated. The one thing we did about 7 years ago now is we bought a coffee roaster. And so we've centralized globally. I mean, we work in 11 countries now. In total, we have over 1,000 coffee bars of slightly different brands. And all of our coffee is roasted in one production facility in London, amazingly enough, in Battersea. And that has allowed us to maintain our quality and our consistency around the world of the coffee.
Yeah. And of course, you would have the quantities to be able to then do that. Whereas I work with smaller quantities with different roasters. So I suppose like my dream for my company would then obviously to have everything in one place where you can maintain it more easily. So, yeah.
We've got a great question here, because it's rare that you have coffee experts together in one place. So what do you think will be the next big thing in the coffee industry? This is from Yoga. Hello, Yoga. Cafes where people work turned out to be a revolution. Where do you think the next one will happen? What's big in coffee then? What's coming next?
Oh,
Wow.
what?
Well, what I would say is that the world has changed
Yeah.
in the last 6 months. And a lot of the assumptions that we made about the industry, about the market, everything has been turned on its head. And we're all having to sort of scratch our heads at the moment and think about what is coming. I mean, for instance, as an example, city centres, big, London and Manchester are just not working at the moment. I'm not sure how we're going to cope with that. The other thing that's changed is people want to increasingly buy local, and they're much, much more interested in sustainability, which is great. But, we all have to respond to that. And you can't bullshit anymore. You've actually got to come up with the goods. You've got to do it. And that, that localization, the being part of the community, and sustainability is going to change the way we do things, and is already changing the way we do things, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's more focus on sustainability and that kind of local community feel. For us, with the whole pandemic, I mean, we had a really difficult time, like clearing some of our shipments, also some of the offices that we supply, and we relied a lot on like our immediate community to give us support. So I agree with you. I don't know about any other products that will help to like revolutionize the coffee industry, but I do think sustainability and that kind of community feel, like you were saying, has hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, and in certain food and drink areas, I mean, dairy is in massive decline, and I think that will continue. I think it's only a matter of a few years now until dairy is a minority. People will be drinking far more oat and soya and so on. So there are changes happening all over the place. Obviously, vegetarian, vegan offers now are critical. When we started, vegetarian was considered a bit of an oddity. If I developed 20 new sandwiches, I'd probably have one vegetarian sandwich, and now it's going to be at least half, if not more, vegetarian.
One thing I will say is I've got a lot of customers that are asking me for like healthy matcha lattes and turmeric lattes. So I guess that is like with the new kind of health conscious vegan vegetarian kind of group.
Yeah, it's very hard to predict, and I think if you knew the true answer, then we'd all be looking at a very nice bonus. Right, officially we've only got 2 more minutes. Are you okay to take a few more questions?
Yeah.
We've got 21 in the in the Q&A box, so we'll try and get through these rapidly. Okay. Here's a question from Ghana. Hi everyone, it's such a pleasure to join the meeting and meet Lauren and Paul. Thank you, Ghana. So happy to hear that Paul's his entrepreneurial story is so inspiring. Question is, what is your greatest fear, and how do you manage fear? And then what motivates you?
Lauren? Well, no, I mean, every business I've helped to start, at some point or another, I've gone through that horrible entrepreneurial thing of waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, drenched in sweat, right? That is not a good place to be. But if you are an entrepreneur and you are starting a business, I think most entrepreneurs I talk to go through that. And it is an absolutely normal thing. I mean, we all worry about things, and very often, time, if you let things just evolve, they kind of mend themselves. So, what I would say is, there's no one thing that worries me more than the other. But there'll always be challenges that will come at you unexpectedly. I mean, obviously, COVID being the biggest one of all, that we've all faced up to, and we'll get through it.
Yeah.
And you've had a closer experience with COVID, many, haven't you, Pablo?
I certainly have. Yeah, I mean, it's devastating for one's health, and health is the most important thing, because if you're not healthy, you can't do anything. And I was hit quite hard by it, and it's extraordinary. The markets now. I'm involved in businesses which have benefited massively from COVID, and I'm involved in businesses which have been, almost destroyed by COVID. But you just have to respond and get on with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think a good dose of fear is actually healthy. I don't know, I might sound controversial.
Could be our Halloween episode, couldn't it? We could do a whole thing on fear, facing up to your fears.
Yep. Yeah, but like Pablo said, you just have to get on with it. If you've got a business, you've got to pivot. You've got to just keep going forward. So.
Here's a good one, as both of you have experienced this. This is from an anonymous attendee. What advice do you have for people who want to build a network, especially if they've just moved to a new country?
Ooh, okay.
Lauren, why didn't you take that one first?
Right. Well, I was an international student, so if I wanted anything done, or I had to make friends, I had to go out and speak to people, I had to build a network. So for me, I'm a little bit of a stalker. You can ask Alex. Like, I literally will email people. I will take business cards. I've got no shame. If someone says no, I don't feel any way by it. I just move on. I think if you don't ask, you don't get. So, use LinkedIn, use social media, send emails, reach out to people. Generally, people are nice. And the worst they could do is say no, and then you just move on.
And how about you, Pablo? I hear jazz is a great connector.
Well, I mean, you've got your social sphere, you've got your family, then you should be going to conferences, you should always answer your phone, your door should be open, you just talk to everyone, even if it's for a few minutes, you always learn something. You've got LinkedIn, which is an amazing tool. I mean, there are so many different ways, but ultimately you've just got to be open to meeting people, talking to people, and have a supply of cards and write down at the end of the day who you've met and what they do, and get back to people. As Lauren said, most people are very friendly and they love to help you. If you say to people, "Can you help me?" very few people will say no.
Mm-hmm.
And come to our events as well, where you'll meet other people who might be able to help you start a business.
Yeah.
So please do keep coming to the events. We've got something that follows on a little bit from that. So when you are talking to people and you may have developed something, it's an early stage product or service, how do you stop it from being stolen? That's from Cheryl Scully.
I honestly, there is no new thing. I mean, come on. Yeah, I think you can talk about if you can't talk about your business in a way where you think it's going to be stolen, then you need to think about how you're communicating. You need to pitch to people. You need to be able to talk about your business to get your brand out there. So I don't think you should be worried about that. And more than likely, there's someone who's done it before or has thought about it. So I wouldn't worry about that at all, unless you've got an actual pattern. I mean, but you wouldn't be talking about the details of that pattern anyways. Pablo, what do you think?
No, I totally agree. I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs I talk to are very wary about talking to me, and they say, "Well, should I get an NDA?" And I mean, in particular in this country, there is zero chance of you being copied. In America, it's a little bit different. You should be a bit more wary, but don't worry about it. You can be open to people. No one is going to copy you. No one's going to steal your idea. Just talk, and people then will come back with other ideas, and maybe will be useful. But don't worry about it.
I agree.
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions if that's okay with you both. Yeah,
sure.
And then what we'll do for the audience, we'll copy all of these, and then maybe we can coordinate a few responses afterwards outside the seminar, if that's okay. Great. So we've got now, this is a good one because you've described it already, Pablo. But when is the right time to leave one's full-time job to commit fully to their startup or their business? Let's go to Lauren first.
Okay, well, I'm still barristering once in a while. So I still go to court a bit. I still do some contract work. I feel like I'm committed to Little Coffee Company as best as I can be, but I'm still balancing between the two. So I think when your business can afford to pay you exactly what you're worth, then maybe that's when you can leave.
And then Pablo?
I mean, it's very difficult to answer because everyone's situation is different. I mean, I made the jump when we worked out that, because my wife has her own career and earns money, and we worked out that if Caffè Nero didn't work out, we could just about afford to live and survive. And we actually went through that calculation and worked it out. And then you can hedge your bets and you can do something part-time, and you can but there comes a point where you have to make a jump, and there's no easy way. You've just got to hold your breath and jump and then make it work.
Yeah, it's definitely hard balancing between the two.
Yeah, totally agree. But I like your phrase, paying you what you're worth, or what you can, what
you're worth.
What you're worth. Now, I think I'm going to have to ask this question because he's asked it in 3 ways. So this is from Zach, and it relates to our sweat equity mention earlier. So what are the things that you have to watch out for when giving away sweat equity and paying salary to first employees? Let's go to Lauren.
Well, if you legally, if someone you need to pay people or compensate them for their time or whatever. But in terms of sweat equity, I would be so careful with that. I tend not to do that because it's your business, it's your baby, it's what you've started. So I think you should really try and see if you can get someone to come in as an intern, or find a budget or some sort of funding that you can bring someone in, rather than sweat equity. But if you have to do sweat equity, then possibly speak to a mentor. Also reach out to maybe some sort of legal pro bono. I think City's got a good relationship with a few, and then you can see if you could get something drafted. Pablo, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. If you can avoid it, you do, because it's a very common problem and mistake made by entrepreneurs, because it seems to be free, but it is definitely not free. It costs a lot. I have had experiences where entrepreneurs have, been told that someone will join them if they give them 10% and, outrageous amounts. And every time I've said no, and they've gone on not to, and then later on have said thank you for that advice. If it's someone really well and how good they are, then it is absolutely normal bringing in a senior person into a business. We would typically give them between 0 and 3% of the equity, but no more than that. Really senior people. So do stop and consider it very carefully, and if you can avoid it, do.
Good advice. I think Seed Legals is a good place for some templates and general advice for startups. It might be worth checking there. But as Lauren hinted towards, we do have pro bono clinic through the law school at City too, where they will be starting sessions again, actually. So watch out for that. Okay, I think what we'll do, we'll take the questions from here. We've copied them, so we'll make sure that we can try and coordinate something afterwards. I've just got a couple of quick messages now to tell the audience about what's coming up next. So I'll just share my screen. Here we go. So very quickly, hopefully you can see that. I will be getting a message through shortly if you can't. So this Thursday, we've got our City Spark Grand Final. Lauren was a finalist a couple of years ago. And we've got 10 amazing ideas competing for the chance to win one of 5 pots of £5,000. So this could be you next year or maybe the year after. So come along, support the entrepreneurs. And if you haven't already done so, then vote for your favourite. The link is at the bottom of that page. If you want to come and have some one-to-one advice with me or one of my team, then you can book through our website a session for a 15-minute or a 30-minute session to discuss your idea or just find out how we can help you. Our next startup seminar is with the founder of GiftGaff. This is Gav Thompson. He's got a background in marketing and he's going to be telling us how you can target your customers. So some interesting stories there. This isn't what he normally wears. We're going to have to ask him to explain that story. But join us next Tuesday. These run every Tuesday. And if you attend 6 or more, then we'll give you a wonderful certificate that you can hang on your wall, along with all of your swimming badges and hopefully your city degree at some point too. Follow us on social media. Instagram is my personal favourite, but we've also got LinkedIn too. Instagram is City Uni Ventures. Somebody already stole City Ventures, but LinkedIn is City Ventures, so you can just search for it simply. And then if you're curious to find out what type of entrepreneur you are, then please take our little quiz. All of these details will be sent around after the seminar. But visit this website if you had any further, if you wanted to find out more. There we go. Let me stop sharing. There we go. So what this leaves me finally to do is to thank our fantastic interviewer and interviewee for a wonderful, wonderful session. I will do a round of applause because we can't hear the audience. I imagine they're doing this at home too. And please both have a lovely evening and stay safe. And we'll hopefully see the rest of the audience at the City Spark final. Thank you very much, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.